Hello. Uh, yeah, the title is missing from there. It just says Indiaco Presents. I guess you know what the title is as you're here. Anyway, Indiaco is the Finnish Indie Labels Association, and 2 years ago we had the first of these indie label panels here at Tallinn Music Week. We have had them also at Music and Media in Tampere, of course, where Indiaco is the Finnish Indies. The actual title for today's panel is written by Nico Kangas, who was supposed to be moderating this, but he got really sick last night. He wasn't even here yet, so it was not like he had a good night out in Tallinn. No, that happened in at home, and he tried to get to the ferry, but he threw up in a taxi on the way. So that's when he started to making calls and said maybe I cannot make it. So we tried to improvise. I have his notes, and I was actually working on this with him originally. But anyway, so the title is Keeping Calm and Staying Cool: How to Run a Successful Indie Label in Today's World. So it's all about running an indie label in today's business climate, which has changed dramatically in the last 5-10 years. And so we try to see how different labels see the situation. I think before we kind of do the introduction row. Yeah, my name is Tapio Korus. I'm from Indiaco, Finland, and running a small indie label called Rockadillo. And we just signed an Estonian artist, Mari Kalkun, whose album is coming out in 3 weeks. So that's a new for us. Anyway, before we start introducing the panelists, I would like all the panelists also say very briefly how they see the future for the music business, for recorded music, and how they see the future in the next 5 years for indie labels to survive in that business. What are the, just not telling how they will survive, but how it looks, because we just had in Finland, the parliament is doing a paper before the elections about they are worried about the future of creative industries. And there was some parliament members got a group together, and there was a musician, Finnish musician, and he prepared a paper after interviewing a lot of people in the industry, and then it was presented 3 weeks ago at the University of Tampere, and there were all kinds of people from other walks of life. There was people from game industry and startups and banking and financiers and all investors and all that. And after the presentation, the other industries got the feeling that, hey, the music industry is complaining, that it doesn't look too good, and game industry is kind of going up, and there's always startups, and so what's wrong with these old industries? So how do we fit in to this overall picture? That's, I think, one of the topics. But let's do the introduction round, and we start with you. Just a couple of minutes about who you are, what you do, and then at the end, does it look really hard for the time being, or are you very optimistic? Because there are many optimistic people as well.
Okay, my name is Nils Bernstein. I worked at Sub Pop Records for many years, and then at Matador for many more years. Last year I went independent, so I do independent publicity and some publicity marketing consultation. I have been working in the music industry since, I guess, 1991 with labels, and before that had a record store and put on shows and whatnot. So I guess I've been seeing it transpire for almost 30 years. It's a pretty big question that you raise. I'm confident. I have good feelings about the future of the music industry. I think as long as there's good music and fans. It's not certainly not going anywhere. I don't really know what more to say as far as specifics, but I'm sure we'll get into that as go around.
I am Bruno Rose from I Love You Records. We are 6 years already running it and trying to survive, and for me it kind of looks, I don't see anything bad in the future about music. As Nils said, that if there is good music, there will be future for it. So it's.
But I mean, you come from a small country, and like in Finland, we have in Indiaco, the association of the labels, we have now much less surviving members. You know, companies there are less and less companies still in the business than there were 5 years ago. So that indicates that there's not so much room for everyone to stay in the business, even if there's also a lot of potential and possibilities in the business. So how about Latvia? There are not that many labels there.
Not so many labels, but there are some, and each kind of does its own thing, have found their own niche and works in it. So yeah, I don't think. No, it of course, as we are really small countries and the market is much smaller and surviving is much harder, but still we kind of try to do our best for our musicians and yeah.
Okay, Jonas, you come from a little bit bigger market.
Yes, I come from Sweden, but the Playground is a Nordic music company, so we are active in all the Nordic countries and also here in Estonia. We are 16 years old as a company and has some 40 employees and represent quite a few foreign labels and have a few of our own and so on. So we were pretty much working towards the new landscape in form of, you know, it's more knowledge. We need to educate ourselves. We have people now doing only YouTube or doing Facebook, doing things that we didn't do 3 years, 4 years ago. So it's a new landscape. There's opportunities, but it's of course quite a lot of work to learn all these new things, how to work them, how to use them, what can be done. So we have a positive feeling, but we also see the polarization between big and small, and the problem that between those 2 points, we have very few middle-sized companies, especially in the small territories. So and that's a concern, because do-it-yourself companies are fine, majors are fine, but we need more of those mid-sized companies who can meet and develop.
So, Katie.
Yes. Hi, I'm Katie Garcia. I do A&R and events for Secretly Group, which is a group of labels. It's Secretly Canadian, Jaguar, and Dead Oceans. And I also co-own and manage a label of my own called Bayonet Records. As far as the future of the music industry, I'm very optimistic. Obviously, there have been a lot of changes and a lot of different trends in the past few years. The rise of vinyl is a pretty positive one, I think most people would say. And then obviously there are other challenges like the changing digital landscape with the rise of, you know, things like Spotify and RDO and how the payment system is. Obviously, it's not a perfect system, and it's definitely has room for change, but I think all of that will come within the next, few years. There's definitely a lot of conversations about that, and I know, especially in the independent world, it's something that everybody's trying to make better.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Secretly Group? What does it mean? Is it a loose, join together? What do
Yeah.
you share, and how individual are all these individual labels in that kind of setup? Because that's an interesting idea.
So Secretly Group specifically is referring to also, I guess, Numero Group, which I forgot to include. Numero Group, which is a reissue label, Jaguar, Secretly Canadian, Dead Ocean. So the four labels do have their own identities. They were started by completely different people who just eventually over time figured if they joined forces and joined resources, they could be a lot more impactful. So, for example, I do A&R for all three of the labels that release new music. As I said, Numero only releases reissue stuff, so their A&R is much different than ours. So I think it's just mainly about having shared resources, and that's kind of the thing that bonds the label group. And I think that, I think because of that, we learn a lot from each other, and it's a really interesting system. I also forgot to mention I used to be the label manager at another record label in the States called Captured Tracks for 4 years. And so coming from that system to this, where we kind of do like A&R by committee, and we'll find a band we really love and then figure out which label it would fit best on, is really interesting.
But do you share any ownership of the labels, or are they independently owned inside this, and you share some back office things?
They're all independently owned. The owners of each label, I believe, I'm looking at you, Hannah. You might be better. Yeah.
I hope everybody can hear me.
Here, I'll just give you a mic.
Katie and I work together, if that's not plainly obvious. Secretly Canadian, Jaguar, and Dead Oceans share common ownership, with the founder of Dead Oceans being solely focused on that label. So there's a shared ownership amongst a group of partners, but how that parses out varies from label to label. So even when you include Numero, you're talking about 6 different partners. And Dead Oceans has 4 co-owners, Jaguar has 3 co-owners, and so on and so forth. But with the exception of Numero, somewhat to the side, the other 3 labels share. I think we just got our first staffer that's dedicated to one label only. Everybody else works for all 3.
So there you have it. Thank you for that, Hannah.
Yeah, let's go to...
Hi, I'm Dave from Fat Cat Records, and I started a record shop in the late 80s, and then I'm now a record label, and I can't even think, I've been running that for like 20 years now, and we've been through various joint ventureships, and we've been funded by distributors and other record labels in our time, and also been independent as well. And how do I think about the music? I think I feel really good about it. Every time I hear new music that makes me excited, I feel like I do when I was 16 and hearing records again. It's no different now that I'm 45, and I want to champion those bands in any way possible and try and share that music with as many people as possible. And that's always what we've been about at Fat Cat, And then I suppose with that, then you have to kind of look at it in a business sense, and how will that work with the business? And it's kind of obviously it's changed, and we've seen dramatic changes. But I just try and embrace it, really. If you need to be on YouTube, let's get on YouTube. And lucky enough, distributors now, or our distributor, is really sussed about it. So it helps us monetize the stuff that we put on there. They look at Spotify. We're part of the AIM deal. They get us good deals for our rates and the rest of it. So I haven't got that attitude like some artists who go, well, I'm not putting my music on there. They're in the fortunate position that they've already got lots of money, and they've obviously got lots of exposure. So they can kind of play around with those things and make these big grand statements. But if you're a kind of starting band and the rest of it, I think you just go out there and do what you need to do to share your music with as many people as possible, as long as it fits with you and your ideals and where you're going and where you fit creatively. I love the idea that now, like you just mentioned, vinyl's on the rise again. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I love the idea now that we sell things direct to kind of a fan base, and you can do that so you can sell people tickets directly. You know, you can engage with an artist's audience and build that up through social networks and through websites. And I think that's a really positive thing. Make limited edition stuff, limited edition vinyl, small runs, make it really special, aesthetically beautiful, you know, and then sell it directly to the fan. And you can make money out of that. And then also bands make good money now when they go on tour, or can make good money when they go on tour. We see bands that will take a record that our distributor will do a few hundred copies of in a certain territory. They go on tour and maybe do like 1,000 of them. And you're just like, so it shows that people who go out to concerts will buy things, which is great. You know, and that works because we still make money out of it. The band makes money out of it. They get to go on tour and go into new areas and things. But I just think it's about engaging with the fan base, in the appropriate way, and however you do that through social media or Twitter or whatever it may be. You know, but I feel good about the future.
Okay, so there's already like a couple of possible angles to discuss further. One is the kind of cooperation between bands that Katie was referring to, and I think Jonas has been kind of for years, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been talking about consolidation, how important it is to, you know, for small labels to you know, get together or you know, because if there are too small labels, you know, it's going to be very difficult, and Playground has been actively, you know, working as a distributor at least for many of those smaller labels. So what's your view on that kind of cooperation, you know, sharing resources and all that? Do you see that as a possible way to you know, to continue in the business for these small players?
Yes, for sure. And I think what you said is maybe a bit of a sound of the future, the way you work. Because obviously anything from accounting to royalties gets much more complicated with the digital market. And we are sending out royalty statements that are 280 pages. We have to send them electronically because otherwise we have to cut down all the trees. So it's a new thing where we have to cooperate about back office and about those functions where we're not big enough to do it ourselves. If that's developing systems or if it's employing people. So I really think that. I also think the distributors might come back, or what you say, it's not the middleman sounds a bit negative, but I mean, a middleman can also be a resource in the terms of where you can have access to a lot of knowledge and input and deals. Like I work a lot with Impala, Merlin and those, and that's also a typical thing. We need to stay strong together to get the deals we need, and also to get the ears of the politicians. It's very tough on your own. So I think organizing ourselves in whatever level it is important. Yes.
And that's happening. That's happening with, you know, Merlin, you know, being basically the aggregator in a way for, you know, for indie labels, and without one strong voice, there would be no chance to talk to YouTube or Google or Apple or these huge companies to get any kind of good deals. So that's one thing. Nils,
Well, it worked the same. You know, Matador became part of the Beggars Group about 10 years ago. And at the time, we were really resistant to it because Beggars had a much bigger profile in the UK, but they had a very, and all those individual labels had a very small profile in the US. But in the end, they benefited so much from the kind of joining with our staff and our resources in the US. And as it turned out, we benefited hugely by the association with them in return. And part of that is what you were talking about, is negotiations. It became very important as YouTube, Spotify, everything else developed, because having that kind of power base to go to them from helped a lot. You know, at the time, Beggars had Adele and Matador. You know, Matador was no longer the power player in that respect, but we could all go negotiate with YouTube and such from a much, much better position. And I think it's interesting that you do A&R for all the labels and kind of see where it would fit. It's kind of the opposite at Beggars, where there's actual bidding wars among the labels, even though it's the same money they're making go up. But I do think that label group kind of phenomenon or whatever, I think that'll grow a lot. And it's a really good way for independents to be able to compete with everyone else.
So obviously there's big differences in different markets regarding physical and how strong the streaming, you know, like Spotify is financially. So what's the current situation with physical distribution in your markets? You know, are there still distributors left, and how you deal with that? I mean, you were talking about direct sales and all that, but you know, so let's talk briefly about the physical world.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we go through Essential in the UK, and we have different partners throughout Europe. You know, and it's you know, it comes down to the record. People want to buy, if people are interested in the record and it's got, you know, there's something going on at press and there's something going on at radio and there's a tour going on and there's a lot of interest in it, you can sell records. It's not a problem, you know. It's getting it to a level, or getting those bands to that level where you can sell records, you know. And there's lots of ways we can do it. You know, we have really good contacts ourselves. A lot of it we have to go and do ourselves outside of the distributor now and make contact with people. So we ring up indie stores and we have a relationship with indie stores, and we make sure that we do that and we know what's kind of going on, and we try and do in-stores with them and do things specially for them. You know, we did a release recently, a 7-inch that just went into a hole through the Twilight Sad, that went into certain indie stores across the UK that were going to take them on, who were doing a little acoustic set and stuff like that. So we try and kind of build relationships and stuff, but the sales are still there for physical. You know, of course they've gone down and they have dropped, but like I sort of mentioned before, you know, there's other areas like vinyl and things that seem to be going up, and if you create the right item, there's no reason why it can't sell.
As a follow-up question about how important are the gigs as the new distribution channel? How much you rely on artists selling, or they have someone selling at merchandise
they
at the
sell
gigs?
a lot.
Yeah.
You know, all our artists do a lot of business, you know, and it really helps. And you kind of wonder, like I say, I mean, you're just like, well, how comes you couldn't sell these and the rest of it? But maybe people in that particular territory are using Spotify more and are streaming things, and the people who are going to the gigs are like the hardcore fans, and they go there and they're like, right, I want to buy this, and they're not going to the local record stores. And we've been having this conversation about how do we get people to go and buy the things rather from the gig, but make sure there's things at the show, but make sure they go to the local record store and kind of support it. But we have this record store day now that goes on, but which I really like, but that's just been taken over by the majors now. You can't even, you know, it's a pointless thing for indies. The majors should have their own day, and we should have our own day. You know,
There should be more than one day.
there should be more than one day, because you go in there. I don't want to, you know. I love Bob Dylan and Pink Floyd, but what are they doing? You know, what are they doing in those stores? I'm just kind of like, repress all those for your own day and let the indies get on and do our thing on our day, you know. I mean, it's great for the stores, but we're supposed to be supporting indie record stores, but indie record stores need to support indie labels. It needs to be a joint thing, really, and the majors need to keep out of it and do their own day. And I'm kind of like, you see all this stuff, and it's a flood now. There's massive queues going on, and you're just like, well, what's the point? So I think more things like that would be really interesting and really good, but I like this idea of indie labels getting together and doing things together. I think that's good. And in terms of them coming together as the kind of Beggars group and Secretly Canadian, that's great if you've got an Adele or you've got a White Stripes. If you get a group of labels together and they go through a lean time, it's a nightmare. Because I've seen it, I've been involved in one, and it was a nightmare. And I'm like, because you need the acts that are selling to make sure everyone else benefits. Because as an indie label, you're not always going to have acts that are breaking all the time. You know, and I look back through our checkered history, you know, and the Sigur Rosses and the Animal Collectives and the Frightened Rabbits, and that you know, we don't have that success rate of going doom because we're not looking for acts like that. We're trying to sign people that we like musically, you know. But when you're in a group and you need to have someone that's doing really well within that group and kind of excel. I'm not putting the other labels down, but they've done so well that if the others have lean times in terms of sales or the access, they can kind of keep the rest of the, in my eyes, they can keep the rest of the group going and keep kind of supporting.
It does float though. I mean, it at the, you know, when we did the deal originally, they were, you know, we had Interpol and it was about, Matador was kind of that one. Then it kind of moved around to, you know, I think the power of that kind of label group structure is that selling artists that you do need, which I totally agree. You have like a better chance of that existing if you have more quality labels. I think you run into problems where, like, that's why the major deals that we had in the past with Warner Brothers and Capitol didn't work, because it was these artists that were completely unrelated, and a culture and a staff and people that had no connection or relationship to the fan base of our bands. So it didn't matter that there was a Madonna in the label group that we were involved with. There was no connection. So at least if you're an indie group and one of the labels is having success, there's you all kind of, yeah, and it feels like more familial, or that it's the same group of people that you're addressing and selling to and interacting with.
I totally agree. I mean, it's just like you guys have been saying, it's a similar thing with Secretly Group. Like, you know, obviously the success of Bon Iver has benefited the group a lot. You know, and it's great. Also, I wanted to, when you were talking about Record Store Day, and like, I completely agree that I think that majors should have their own day. Honestly, one of the main thing that annoys me about that all is that they take up so much of the pressing plant's resources, and then and because they're pressing such a high volume, and they're paying them way more than an independent label could, because we're pressing lesser quantities, their pressings get priority over independent labels, and that sucks. And that's like a huge issue that I think we can all agree on.
Jonas, what's happening with physical? I mean, in the country where Spotify is really strong, you know, or in the Nordic countries in general, I have heard some rumors about, you know, one warehouse being closed by the majors, and you have to find another solution. What's going on there? Are there still physical shops left?
It's two different issues here. Number one, if the warehouse is going to close or not, they're always closing and changing warehouses. I don't think that's the least of the problems. The problems is the shops. The problem is there's no meeting place any longer, as the shops, they worked as a meeting place before. There is a few, of course, but I think if I say we have 4 of those in Sweden, that's pretty much correct. And in totally, you can maybe buy records in another 20 places. So there's the selling of the records of physical records is in a negative spiral. I think that goes for Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and I don't think we can stop it really. There will be a few shops left, and there will be these releases, as you said, for the fans, and of course there will be a physical market, but it's going to be a niche market, and it's going to be more like a merchandising item, at least in our territories, because the digital is now 90% nearly of the turnover. So we already passed that when it was. So even if the vinyl goes up and is now maybe, I think in our group accounting for 50% of the sales, it still is quite a small number in total. So for us, it's very much about how to use the digital space. That's where the battle goes on, so to say.
Latvia?
We have kind of pretty tricky, I think, this situation with the shops and all the physical sales, because in Latvia we have a couple of, I don't know, some 4 maybe shops, all based in Riga. We are distribute to them ourselves. In Estonia there are much more, and there are bigger distributors. But for instance, in Lithuania there are, if I am not right, correct me, but there are no record stores at all. Oh, there. Oh, that's good news. Didn't know that. So yeah, and all these physical sales are really down, and since we had iTunes coming in and all these streaming services quite late, people used to find it in internet. Let's call it find, yeah. And it's kind of, when iTunes came, it was hard still for people start to buy digital thing if they used to steal it, because there were no other ways how to get it. And but when came these streaming services, I think that changed a lot, because now it's much more easier just to listen it rather than steal. Why should you? You just go on and listen for it.
I have a question in regards to this, because I'm also from Latvia, but the thing is that it relates to artists, the relationship to the indie labels. Because, for instance, let's say in Latvia there's low physical sales, but there's, like, as we know, there's many of these digital distributors which artists can apply directly. So I recently had an argument with one artist, where he was saying, what's the point for me being under some indie label if I can release music by myself and I can hold all my royalties, everything 100% myself? So what's the point?
That's a good question, and I was supposed to ask that later. It's on the list, but that's we are not there yet. We are not there yet. But it's a very relevant question. Where do the indie labels find themselves? 2 years ago, the subject was between the hard place and the crown, meaning that yes, there are many artists that want to sign with the major because they thought, and some still think, that they can make them famous worldwide, which is not always the case, and then or they can do it themselves. So where does it leave the indies? We're going to discuss that in a little while, but let's have a little bit of more look into these different markets, different mediums.
Yeah, and streaming. Okay. This, and we kind of have to focus on this, how to raise streaming, because it's the basically nowadays only way to get some proper income from that, even if it's really small. But the bigger catalog you have, the better. So, but about physical, we have some bands which David said that kind of sells good, and then we can release some new stuff and make find some new artists and release. Yeah, it's kind of all the time surviving.
But does anyone make money from vinyl? I mean,
yes.
Jack White does make money, and there's a few who sell in tens of thousands, but in the smaller markets, normal vinyl pressings are 300, 500 copies.
Yeah, but for instance, the vinyl is kind of rising, but still it's pretty small in our countries, I think, and still CDs rule. And we have some artists who sells thousands, and we have artists who sell, I don't know, some 500, 300, even less. So, and have to find somehow this balance between them.
But will the CD become also that kind of a promotional tool in the future? Like vinyl seems to be now, that it's the artists definitely want to have the vinyl, but it costs much more than a CD to manufacture, and the margin is very small, and it's in some countries, maybe not in Germany or UK, where they have deals with the local post office or DHL or whatever, but in Finland it's ridiculously expensive to send. If you have mail order. To send a vinyl album to a customer, doesn't make any sense. It's so expensive.
Yeah, it is so. Yeah.
But people want vinyl.
Yeah.
The collector, someone that's into music wants vinyl, and that's who you're appealing to. You're appealing to that person that really loves music and wants the aesthetic object and likes it in the collection, to get it out and to look at it and to take it out and put it on, and it sounds better. It's always going to sound better. So no wonder vinyl's always going to be popular. They don't mind spending the money. So you can, a piece of vinyl can be £20, £25 now, and if someone wants it, they'll pay that for it because they're really into the band and they're getting something and they're limited edition, and I think it's brilliant,
To add to that, just really quickly, I also think that, I was going to bring this up earlier, but another thing that I think is really unique about vinyl, and the reason it's gone up so much, is because it's like a physical item that you can have, and you can make it so special. You can have all these kinds of limited editions, color vinyl, that come with like a bonus 7-inch or like a bonus DVD, or bonus tracks on the digital download. Like, you can do so many different things that make it special, and to those people who really want to support artists, I think they appreciate that. And I know there's like a huge vinyl collecting culture within the US, and maybe that's why it's taken off there more so than it has in Nordic countries. And obviously in the UK as well. But we've seen, it's insane the amount of vinyl that I've seen be sold within. I've only been in the music industry for like 5.5, 6 years, and the increase in vinyl sales is remarkable, just in the time that I've been in this industry.
But isn't it, it's very luxurious, we're in the US and UK. I can't imagine for people in almost any other territory that it would even make sense to press vinyl.
Totally. Which is why I was saying it's
doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, which is why I was saying in the U.S. and the UK there's this vinyl culture, and it's affordable to them. But maybe if you're exporting it somewhere else, I could totally see why it would be unaffordable in those regions.
Or just if you're not printing more than
a
certain amount, you simply can't.
It just doesn't make sense.
No, it's not. I think we have the same culture for vinyl here. It's just that we're talking about, when you're talking about 10,000 potential buyers, we're talking about 500 or 200. But I think that the battle of the future has not. The vinyl is important. We should not forget it. It's part of our culture, but still, the money is not about the vinyl. The survival is about doing new things in a different way. It's about mastering the digital possibilities. So I think that's where those who are going to do that is the winners. Those who are going to sit with vinyl is going to stay with vinyls.
Yeah. I shouldn't even tell anyone how much I spent on vinyl a week ago when I was in Austin at South by Southwest. It must have been at least $400 I paid for all these vinyls. So, but my philosophy is that it's cheaper to be a vinyl fan and buy them rather than release them in a small country, because that's very expensive. But
I think just something about that I've found, especially working with Mexico and Latin America, there's markets that, because you can administer your streaming and digital from a central place, all of a sudden it makes sense to market your bands in territories where you used to not sell any records, because you theoretically can make money on streaming and digital sales in those places. So you might never have even bothered to do interviews for Argentina or something, but now if you do that, you can sell 500 copies when the article comes out, that without, you're not doing any extra work, it's all administered through iTunes internationally. It's a way of making all these markets really, I think, a lot more relevant and more part of the overall business, we used to just completely dismiss 90% of music markets, and now we really don't. There's, and then you find pockets, you might find somebody that, Perfume Genius is massive in Belgium, and who knew? And that's, it ends up being a great source of revenue for us because it doesn't cost anything. It's really the benefit of the streaming and digital. So it's a way of kind of internationalizing what we do, I think.
So we seem to be moving towards the digital discussion now. I mean, 30 years ago it was a pain in the ass to be forced to release vinyl cassettes and then the new thing called the CD. You know, it was expensive, and then some of these formats didn't sell anymore and all that. So are we all dreaming about the day when basically, you know, all the money will be coming from digital? And how soon is that going to be happening? I mean, in Sweden, definitely it's very close. Yeah, and if I speak to the managing directors of the big major 3 labels, they kind of give the impression that they would be really happy if they don't have to deal with physical anymore, because, you know, there's more money, and well, at this moment they seem to be making much more profit from you know, digital, and that might change if the accounting is forced to be a little bit more transparent, and the royalty rates change, and then we're going to discuss if it's a license or what, you know, when you do with streaming services. There's a lot of big issues being, you know, talked between the you know, musicians and musicians union and the big labels about, you know, what is fair, and the independent companies have the fair digital rights, you know, statement that has been signed by more than, I think, 1,000. Jonas, are there 1,000 labels that signed that last year?
I'm not sure, but most of the independents.
Yeah,
have
most
signed
of the
it.
indie labels have signed that. You know, it's all about transparent, you know, accounting and transparency in this digital world, and so that's going to be a big change happening. But yeah, so in Europe, at least, it seems that streaming is the king. I mean, I can say from my iTunes income that it has really gone down. You know, no one is downloading and paying for it, and now streaming has really, like it was said before, has replaced piracy. We don't need to talk about piracy anymore. You know, even I spoke with a couple of Russian friends this morning, and they said that everyone they know has Spotify, and Spotify is not available in Russia, but they can go around it with fiddling with the ISPA, and they have a Spotify account in America or UK, and they pay premium, and so they are no more, you know, using the pirate services. So that's good news. So there are more consumers going into that. But shall we talk about the, you know, sharing the money, you know, from those services? What's how do you see this freemium model that Spotify introduced, and which kind of was very important in getting rid of the piracy, and now Universal and the majors are trying to stop the freemium, the free service, and want everyone to pay for streaming. What's your opinion on that?
Well, going back to what you said about piracy, and I mean, I think that, like you said, it's definitely a benefit. You know, at least artists and labels are getting something. It's not very much, especially independent labels and artists. However, it's better than nothing. However, but I feel like the attitude, that's not the attitude we should have. It should be a little more fair. The way that it's paid out now to major labels as opposed to independent labels, it's really unfair, I think, to independent labels, and that is something that, like, we've all been talking about, needs to change through you know, policy, and I think I'm confident that it will. I'm very confident that it will, because it's new. It's very new, you know, in the U.S. The rise of streaming media is relatively new, so I think we're still trying to navigate that and using that and making profit from that. So those are my thoughts.
It's going to become, more and more revenue is going to be generated from streaming. It's just the way it's going. I think there's nothing we can do, I don't think, to stop that. I think we just got to make sure we get fair rates and the artists are paid properly for it. My kind of concern is how people go on there and discover music and the way it's presented, you know, and those people that have that control over what we listen to or what we consume or how we consume it. And I wonder if it's going to be very hard to discover new music on there, you know, and just the way it's kind of presented. I use Spotify and I look at how they present things and it's awful, you know. I'm just like this, and I'm hoping that it will just end up with people doing things directly, you know, and they go, I won't want to be on Spotify. If you want to get my music, you have to come and get it from me. You stream it from me, and they control their own revenue and the rest of it like that, and start moving away from these big corporate structures, you know. Then why should iTunes have the monopoly on it? Why should Spotify have the monopoly on it? And we all just sign up willy-nilly, and then they dictate to us how we consume our creativity. And that's the bit that really worries me, because I go on there and it's awful. You know, but I still go on there because there isn't really any other kind of alternative. But I'm hoping that future generations will kind of go, fuck this, I'm not having any of this, this is nonsense, and kind of try and rebel against that in a creative way and do things more interesting with kind of the technology as they get more to grips with it and realise that they can empower themselves, you know. So it's there, you use it, and that's how it is. You try and work and relate with these things, but we don't really have that much control over it, and we're kind of dictated to, really. So I'm up for doing things outside of that as well, and kind of not going in there and trying to kick it down or smash it down, but kind of look at, right, it comes from that direction, but what else can we do? What else can we do? And always be looking for other avenues, you know.
A quick thing to add, that I don't think there's any, like, I know there are a lot of people who are kind of resisting or like anti-streaming, and a lot of artists have like pulled their stuff off of Spotify, but personally, like, it's just one of those things, like, it's inevitable, it's going to happen whether your stuff is on there or not, and, you know, if it's not on there, then people are going to be more likely to pirate it, you know. So it's like, what would you rather? I mean, it's the lesser of two evils in a way, you know. That's kind of my view on it.
But I need to say a few things here, not because Spotify switched, but I think Spotify is one of the few services who did it the right way. They contacted all the independent labels early on. They did the deals in a very transparent way. We're getting pretty much exactly the same conditions as the majors. I do agree that the editorial part is where they have to develop quickly, for sure. So that's absolutely a necessity, I think. But I think we need to also have in mind that we had an industry that was more or less disappearing with Pirate Bay and so on. It killed everything. Spotify did the right thing. They treated us very fairly. And now I think when these artists say we're dropping out of Spotify because we only see cents, it's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of misinformation, because why don't they drop out of the other services that don't pay them anything? I mean, YouTube or whatever, you know, that's for free, more or less. So why go for the only one that been treating us fairly? Google and those are the big ones. We don't say to Google, you know, change the law, because they are still putting all the pirate sites, when you search, they have the pirate sites on top. Why are they allowed to have that? That's for me the bigger question. Why are they benefiting from our content without paying? So I think we should endorse those that at least are treating us with respect. And then, yes, they have to develop, and I'm sure it's going to develop, but the big struggle is between Google and us. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, 2 days ago, Jonas and myself, we were in Brussels talking to some members of European Parliament and with the Impala people, and it's obvious that in the big picture, you know, this digital and streaming has been a leveler. You know, the market share of the indie labels as a whole is bigger in digital world than it is in physical world, because there are less gatekeepers. You know, I mean, and you know, with the physical shops, you have to pay to get shelf space and all that. So that's gone. But what hasn't happened still, I mean, this is positive that the indies market share is higher now, but what is still that needs to be improved is that there was a lot of talk about long tail. That when there's no inventory, physical inventory, you can have everything available in these stores. In actual fact, in streaming, only the hits, not even full albums by the most popular artists on the major labels. People just listen to one song of these albums. So what's the future of an album in this world? Is there a future? And what does it mean to the type of artist that can make a living out of streaming? Will it change the rules somehow? Any opinions on that? I'm a little worried that, the long tail doesn't work at all. Some of the minor genres of music are very difficult. In the streaming services, there's no money coming in because the people who listen to those. That's my pet project, and Jonas is bored with this already. But it's we've been discussing this. It's called the user-centric model, which is not in use now. But at least all the Finnish indies strongly feel that the way the money from streaming should be shared is not that if all the money goes from premium goes to a big pot and then it's divided to the most popular tracks. So if someone just spends every month €10 and only listens to jazz, it doesn't really benefit those jazz artist who he listens or she listens to, because it all goes to the big pot and it's divided by, the number of total streams and all that. Maybe that wouldn't make a huge difference, but it, in Norway there's some studies that it would have meant 14% more domestic, repertoire getting 14% more out of that kind of system. So it's might be a partial solution, but it would, mean the only way to do that would that all the labels would agree on it, including the majors.
You see how the system works?
The user-centric. Yeah, if you pay 10 euros a month and you only listen to 10 tracks, then you would get, basically, seven, the seven, after Spotify's share, that 7 or whatever would go to those tracks, but that's not how it goes, that would mean that even if you only play that song once, that would get, if you only play 7 songs, that they would get €1 each, but now they don't get anything because they are so far in the value chain. So it's called the user-centric model. But
I just have to say that if we now have statements which are 170 and 250 pages long every quarter, every half year, with that model, we're going to send out 10 Bibles. And I think the risk is that nobody will understand it because it's so complicated, it's going to be so much information that people will never even be able to audit anything. So I think I agree, yes, if it was just doing it like that and everybody agreed, fine. From a practical matter, we also have to make sure that those people are getting the money and then has some reasonable chance to make sure that it's correct. So that's why I'm a bit skeptical. But I also like to say, I think it ties in what you said on the editorial thing. The reason why some of the niche music are getting hit now in the streaming service is that there is no editorial space that is good enough. So the album could survive on a digital platform if the platform was designed to take care of the album and presented the artist and the album. So I think that's the challenge. That's what we need.
Yeah, I think we need more, specialist streaming services that are, people will subscribe to them because they know that they will find the music they like from those services. Because from Spotify sometimes, in theory it's very easy to search, but in practice, it's quite complicated and
There's no filter on the content on
Yeah.
on Spotify either. There's all manner of there's lots of racist music on Spotify as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And I've written to Spotify and I
Yeah.
told them about it, and
Yeah.
it's full of some absolute hatred music on there.
Yeah.
And they do nothing about it. And me personally, I feel kind of like I can't wait for specialised services, and it's going to happen. It is definitely going to happen at some
Yeah,
point. Someone's
because-
going to make that move, and all the indies are going to go, do you know what? Not interested in being here. Or if we are, you're going to have this bit of our catalogue, but we're going to take the majority of our stuff and we're going to sit over here. And someone's going to do it at some
Yeah, yeah.
point, because it can't all be held in one structure.
especially if streaming is kind of replacing radio as it is now. We need curators there, to show us the good stuff. We need
Yeah.
some guiding lights.
I do U.S. radio for Secretly Group, and that's editorial on the streaming side is an enormous missing piece. I am so desperate for one of these sites to be able to kind of run with the ball and to take, when we have some momentum behind an artist, when we have something that's really starting to build, the next thing that happens is it comes up against the bottleneck of FM radio, which is still completely major controlled, which is still completely at the mercy of the same handful of people. And as soon as one of the streaming sites has strong enough editorial to move that, to break an artist in the specific way that FM radio can, I feel that's the next frontier. Everything's going to be different after that.
Yeah, I guess we all agree on that, definitely.
But I think there is this kind of streaming service Deezer, which is editorial stuff, and you can always see some pics and stuff, similarities, and which kind of, I don't know, I use that more, because this is not like faceless, just lots of list of artists, but it's kind of picked, and I feel like it somehow follows what I like and picks the right things for me. And
Yeah, I mean, Deezer is definitely different, but there are not that many people outside of their core markets that actually use it, and they haven't really made an impact in Nordic countries. I mean, they've been coming in, and it's, in many ways it's a much more interesting thing what they offer. But what worries me a little bit, I think the main thing that I'm not that too optimistic about is that is there room for all these kind of diversity there, because it seems that now there's people are happy, with one or two. So now iTunes is starting their streaming thing in June. That's what the news is. So maybe there's room for two, and then Google is kind of Google Play is still somewhere, and YouTube. And apart from those, is there room for for these specialist services? How many services people can support?
When I was growing up, there were 3 TV channels, and then a fourth one came along that was kind of alternative. And people are like, well, 4, who's gonna watch the fourth one? And there was public television, 1 channel. And really, that fourth channel was it seemed ridiculous at the time. And I mean, people, the most basic cable thing you can get is over 100 channels. So I think there's room for, if something's good, there's room for it. I think the market makes room.
Yeah, just going back to one thing there with the freemium thing, I think it's one of the interesting things, and one of the things we need to still say support is that most of these services has a tough one getting into the market, right? It's very costly, it's a big exercise, and I think nobody will start paying, even if it's only 5 or 10 euros a month, for a service they haven't tested first. I think that's always been the same with most things we buy and use, that we want to test it first to see if it's good enough. So that's why I think on the freemium side, I just want to say I think it's an absolute necessity to have it. If it's now for 2 months, 3 months, whatever, but
it's needed, because otherwise I don't think people will even start trying those new services. And we want diversity, we want new services. So I think we need to be open. When Universal want to close that, or when they ask Mrs. Twain to say that she hates Spotify, I think they have their own agenda. I think they're doing that for a purpose. And I think they are the ones who now feel that Spotify is getting too big, too powerful. How can we handle this on our own?
I mean, you in Sweden, you had a good example how effective it was when the telecoms were, you know, using 3 months free Spotify as a way to, you know, to compete with others, and that kind of, it's like a drug deal, you know. You give some free samples and then you are hooked, but how much are people in the end, you know, how much, what is a reasonable amount of money that we as content producers could expect from people to pay every month, including films, Netflix and all that, and music, you know? What do you think is realistic? You know, what kind of pie could there be for digital content that would be, you know, still realistic for people? I mean, in the developed countries, of course, it's different in third world. Any idea? I mean, someone said, you know, that it has to feel like free. You know, there are these books written about, you know, that it should feel like it's free. Like people pay for water, but they think that it's free. But you know, is it for 5 euros a month
I
that
think it
everyone?
depends on the quality. I think
Yeah.
it all comes down to the quality, and it's about, you know, with Spotify, how much, I don't know how much you pay a month, £10 is it a month, is it, for premium, or £5?
$9.99.
Something like that. Amazon Prime's a £5, and I've got that, and it's full of nonsense. There's terrible films on there.
Yeah.
There's like 20 good films, and the rest of it is just it's filled with dross. Do you know what I mean? And I would pay more for someone to go through and sort it out and deliver me a load of watchable films that I could actually sit and watch, rather than just seeing a load of nonsense on there. You know, and there's actually, when you look into these, same with Netflix as well, there's very few what I'd call quality items on there, and I think people would be prepared to pay more. I would be prepared to pay more if the editorial was right and someone was selective about what they were delivering. You know, I think the Spotify model is there's so much stuff on there, and you just go from one to the other and one to the other, and I think it's because they're the only one out there at the moment, really, and they're dominating the market. But I think as more specialist things will come along, people will pay more money to be kind of cherry picked. You know, so there's a jazz one and they're really into that, they must really think, well, this is what I want, you know, this is what, and I want the things that are offshoots around that, so I'll pay the money for it. I would hope.
People that pay for New York Times, Wall Street Journal, that pay for newspaper access, it seemed really crazy at the time when that came up as an idea. And now more and more people are willing to do that because it feels like it's just being done for you, you know, somehow. Someone's curating it.
I think we have to wrap up very soon, but so maybe a couple of questions from the audience. Yeah. There was a question about that. Yeah. Let's take Olaf first. We didn't touch yet this one thing, I promise. So I go for that in the last round. But Olaf.
I'm really interested in the fact that in Sweden the streaming is being used to invest in new talent, but that's fine if you've got a back catalogue with lots of people tapping into that. What hope is there really for new startup labels to actually get enough money in to sustain a business, rather than you know, having being able to rely on a back catalogue with the streaming revenue from that?
Who will take that?
Can I say one thing about, I think there's a lot of new companies coming up now within hip-hop, within dance and so on, that relies solely on the streaming model or the digital models. So that's not, that's very obvious. And they can sustain that. Of course, it's all about the music and finding hits and so on. And I think there's a very gradual step there from do-it-yourself. The label, do-it-yourself, so to say, is many times just an artist, sometimes a few artists. But I think those that are having connections into other things, live,
publishing, management, those are the ones who are on the rise, at least in Sweden, where you are becoming companion or partner with the band, the artist, and you have a piece of the pie on all the things. That's how the new companies are looking. Yes, I would say so, and some sort of split of all the incomes. That's how it looks. The do-it-yourself artists, to be honest, I think are going down because there's millions of tracks that nobody listens to Spotify. Why? Well, because they don't have anyone promoting them. So it's not just making it available. That's not going to make it happen. You have to have people who know how to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, this is already partly answering the question. What is... it's obvious that nowadays, when there's the possibility for doing it yourself, that the labels are totally different from what the labels were 10 years ago. I mean, the deals are totally different. There's so much more flexibility, you know, all kinds of joint ventures, and you know, there's a lot of common interests. But what would be the proper answer to that question? Why do the labels? Why do artists still need labels, and especially why do they still need indie labels in this new world?
I think, as we've all, you know, talked about this whole time, I think it's about having resources and having, you know, people there who are passionate about your project, who, you know, can. It's a lot of work to put out a record, and to do, you know, as Nils knows, like, to do publicity for a project takes so much effort. There's so many different facets, and as, you know, my coworker and dear friend Hannah Carlin knows, you know, also radio is another really big part of that, and having, you know, and then also having a digital team who's talking to iTunes and Spotify and making sure that your artists are seen on their editorial pages, and having, you know, like, having those people who are pushing your art, you know, the artist out into the world. I think that's what makes a label valuable, and where, as maybe a band just doing it themselves, they might not have those same connections, or they might not, you know, have the amount of time to do it. They can certainly make those connections on their own, but I think just as far as the amount of time to do marketing and publicity and everything yourself, it takes a lot, and that's why I think that artists still turn to labels for, you know, to put their records out, in also manufacturing. As I know that it's not as big of a deal in the Nordics, but manufacturing vinyl is quite expensive. And if that's something that you want, to do it yourself is, it's quite risky.
And when you're going to play, if you're doing all this stuff, which actually labels supposed to do, and it's kind of, for me, I think it's senseless to no, maybe not senseless, do it yourself is, it works, but I think it's much easier with the labels, and there are people who are working on it. You should stick on the music, and that's what you are doing, and there are people who are doing the other stuff, just to releasing it, just to having this opportunity to put it on digital market. Your record doesn't mean that it will work. It just will disappear in a million list, and that's it.
Yeah. Does anyone agree with me if I say that some of the indie labels definitely are brands as well? They have you know, there's a lot of brand loyalty there. If it, you know, I could take any examples from jazz or ECMs or acts or whatever to all these different you know, rock labels. So it's quite easy to say that you know, for a new artist, to get signed to a label where the new artist finds, you know, artists that are in some spirit similar, that will definitely help the audience to kind of give credibility for that new artist, that the artist belongs to some kind of a tribe or family, and it automatically, you know, puts the artist on a second level.
Like a fruits from the same tree.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think it's also a financial thing. I mean, honestly, I know so many bands. The first thing is, can we get some money to do this and that? I mean, we have one band playing here now tonight called Hurricane Love, and I mean, they would not have been here if we didn't pay the tickets, if we didn't arrange the whole thing around it. All of those things doesn't come easy for 5 guys who maybe are more or less broke.
The other thing is the booking agent. A lot of booking agents won't even consider booking you. You wouldn't even have access to them if you weren't signed to a label.
Yeah, there's one question.
Hi, I work with Katie and Hannah as well. Hey, Katie. Yeah, we're everywhere. This is not necessarily a knock against education, but in talking about why we indie labels exist is to some degree, and me coming from an education background, just knowing so many musicians who are in schools and colleges and conservatories are never taught anything. There's no one to teach them anything about the way the music industry works in any realistic sense, other than a book that by the time it's published is already out of date in some way or another. No musician I've ever met starting out knows anything about radio. It took me a while to even partly understand radio myself, to be honest. Yeah. And that's not to say that if we start educating artists, labels don't need to necessarily exist, but I think a big reason why, to me, indie labels need to exist is to educate the artists and what they need in a smart, responsible way, not to just throw money at them and give them, advances that they can then waste on whatever. But yeah.
Do artist development course. So there's colleges in the UK now where you can go and do these things. But to be honest with you, the majority of the students I deal with, they don't care about their creativity. They see an industry and they teach them about an industry. It's not about creativity. It's about brands and markets and products and the rest of it. And the two things, they kind of coexist, but it's like oil and water, really. The best music doesn't come from that place. And it's about letting people express their creativity and being able to help them on that kind of journey. And I believe that you can do it yourself. And you can start your own label. You can promote your own music. Yeah, of course it's going to an indie label and doing stuff. I think that, but don't make that your only route. I'd never tell anyone that's your only way, because throughout the music time, lots of the best music has all come from people who have done it themselves and will do it themselves and create their own things around it,
And that, going back to your point about brands, and then we'll stop monopolizing here, but it's not just an abstract idea that one artist is connected to another artist is connected to another artist. There's an actual real community that comes from the artists on indie labels. Artists on everyone up there has innumerable stories about bands becoming friends with other bands and eventually collaborating with other bands and forming like real, normal, on the ground human communities and relationships with each other that drive everybody forward, and that starts with the commonality of being on the same label but moves way, way beyond that.
I think we have run out of our time. I see some signs there that. So thank you very much for the panelists, and thank you for you listening. And I would like to give you a web address where you can find out more about indie labels in Europe especially. And there's an organization called Impala, which is the Association of European Indie Labels, and the website is impalamusic.org, and there's just a brand new digital action plan promoting Europe's digital single market through culture. It's a brand new paper. You can find out about this agenda, because the European Union is going to be making a new digital directive this year. So we are trying to influence that it will be good for creative cultures and not against it. So check out impalamusic.org. Thank you very much.